I was living in Kingswood, which is a small suburb of Penrith, 35 miles west of Sydney. I was working in the retail trade. I was a salesman for Knock and Kirby's hardware store down the high street in Penrith. I'd been there almost 2.5 years when I got called up. Prior to that, I had 2.5 years in retail selling shoes. I entered the full-time workforce at the age of 14 and the casual workforce at the age of 13, wrapping parcels on a cash register as a 13-year-old kid and actually paying tax at the time. I'm an original old boy from St Dominic's College, Penrith, having emigrated out from Ireland in 1958, spending 6 months at the convent school, St Nicholas of Myra, and then into the Christian Brothers at St Dominic's from 1959 till I walked out the door in 1962. Well, I was very keen on learning things about military history and stuff. The library was a good source of information, and I knew about Vietnam. I knew that it was known as Indochina. I'd learned about the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu. My father went from the 6th Battalion Royal Tank Regiment to E Group in Southeast Asia Command under Mountbatten. And he did Burma, Siam. They fought and trained in Indochina, in the Sinkiang Desert, in Indochina and in the Sinkiang Desert. And they were also helping the Dutch try to retake Java after the end of hostilities with the Japanese, before he was returned to England and demobbed in 1946. After serving for 9 years, he went back to Ireland, settled back down there and married my mum. So I had an appreciation. I also knew that we were part of SEATO, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organisation. That was the big thing back then, so that was in the papers. So there was a bit in the papers about it, and it was your own knowledge from history and geography at school as well. I went through Kapooka. That was a culture shock. But it was a hard place, but it was a great social leveller. Everybody was the same. It's a great pride you can actually say as one RTB Kapooka. I then, when that was finished, I was allocated the Royal Australian Armoured Corps, excuse me, and went south to Puckapunyal to the Armoured Centre, as it was called then. It's now known as the School of Armour, where I underwent training as a driver signaller on M113A1 Armoured Personnel Carrier, the APC. The training was in 2 parts. Radio, you learn to be a radio operator and send prepared messages and things like that, and actually answer the radio in lieu of your crew commander. You also learn how to encode and decode grid references and what they call crypto trigram messages, crypto messages. And then there was the DNS course, driving and servicing, where you learned all about the vehicle and learning how to drive it, ground appreciation. And then there was gunnery in there as well, which was 30 calibre and 50 calibre gunnery. So you did all that. So you were completely rounded out as a driver SIG of an APC, or as we used to call them, tracks, compared to your American counterparts. They just drove it, they did nothing else to it. We looked after them to the best we could, and when it got outside our level of expertise, the RAMI, the Light Aid Detachment, the LAD would then come in and do their business on the vehicles. It was great. You were given the choice of units, what you wanted to put your hands up for. We all put our hands up for 3CAV. We thought, let's go to Vietnam, let's have an adventure, let's get a war service loan and be an RSL member like the old diggers we see. And so we were given the option. You could get posted to the unit at Holsworthy that was training you for deployment. It was known as Detachment A Squadron 3rd Cavalry. And you could elect not to go to Vietnam. You could sign the documentation and you did the rest of your time in that unit till your 2 years were up. I had 2 large zipper bags called echelon bags or eshy bags. Right? All my gear was inside that. Basic webbing, sleeping blankets, blow-up mattresses, greens, spare beret, riding implements, camera, and all the stuff needed to get by over there. We flew over. Qantas flew us over. We had a layover at Singapore while I refuelled the aircraft, and I sent a postcard home to Mum and Dad from Singapore. I paid for it to go airmail, and that was about May 69. It arrived in September 69. The heat and the humidity, it was murder. Hit you like a hammer blow. right, and the noise, the sheer noise, because it was a fighter aircraft or some form of aircraft taken off every few seconds in that aircraft. It was the busiest airport in the world. The smell of JP4 fuel, the smell of rotting vegetation, I'd describe as 1,000 years old, that old smell. And the women. We were given shoebox meals, right, on the aircraft. A little cardboard box with your tucker inside it. And then they were dumped right in bins off the aircraft while we were standing around on the tarmac waiting for the Hercules to take us to Nui Dat, or the Dat as we learned to call it. And these women were grovelling around and grubbing around in the garbage bins, taking what leftover scraps of food they could find out of the shoebox lunches, right, putting in bags and taking it home. And that was my first experience, I suppose, of what you could call grinding poverty. That was a bit of a shock. I still am haunted by seeing that to this day. When I got there, I was expecting tented accommodation because, right, we'd seen photos, but the tents had been replaced in the squadron with huts, corrugated iron huts, and mesh along the sides to keep the mozzies out and to allow air to circulate. So I was living in hutted accommodation, concrete floor, steel bed, right, with a mosquito net over the bed, right, and everything. I lived out of my bags. There wasn't much hanging space there. We'd see the odd unit from the 11th Armoured Cavalry, right, which were located up to the northwest of us at Black Horse Base. That and Bearcat were gigantic bases. They could take a Boeing 707, because actually, right, bring their reinforcements, or RIOs as we call them, into country and drop them right into the tactical area, right, and then take off. But not much to do with the Americans at all. A bit on land clearing in 1969 on my first tour. We were providing cover and protection for an engineering company at land clearing great swathes of countryside to deny the enemy access and to create like giant fire breaks for vehicular advances and for infantry to patrol through. Well, if you were back at the Dat and back from an operation, right, you could be allocated, well, it was basic housekeeping, mess duties, right, you could be the runner, you could be up in the tree, right, it was called the tree, but they had to put a watchtower there, and you were on radio picket, right, on the sentry watch, and you'd be regularly relieved. Or you were, right, you might get the rubbish run, and if you'd had a hard night the night before, it wasn't an easy job to empty all the beer cans, right, into the trailer and all that stuff and take it down to the tip, which stunk to high heaven anyway. So that was not a good duty, but you did your own housekeeping. If you weren't busily engaged in anything else, then you probably go back to your hut and just take it easy, maximum rest, because sometimes you never know when you're going to get a decent sleep again. But if you were out in the field, well, let's say you put in a night ambush, you stand down from the ambush, or on the next day move to an admin hide, do your shaving, right, have your feed brew up, and then off you go, pick your infantry up, and you go patrolling with a slow walking pace, keeping overwatch on the infantry who'd be out there in front of you and to your sides. And it was just a long day like that, just long days, grinding along at a very slow speed. You may have a convoy escort, which would be a bit better because you could move along at a good rate of knots. You could pick your convoy up at the Southern RV at Berea and take that convoy all the way to Long Bin, 60 miles up the road. You take an extra driver. I went up, in fact, on one, I went up shotgun as a spare driver. It was a terrific trip to see the Yank base up there, how big that was. But that would be a normal day. Convoy escorts did get a bit monotonous after a while. They could get boring, but it got you out of the Dat and on the road doing what you were trained to do. They were set up in a typical what we call a harbour setup, right? The three cav right unit itself was on the western side of the old Route 2, right, which had to be rerouted because we were now there. And in a circular fashion around that way, and it joined the artillery unit around to our left. If I go from my right to my left, it was in that way. You would have 1, 2 and 3 troop with their vehicles, what we call on the wire, in front of a big defensive bund, facing outwards, right. You would have part of the troop also set back in reserve. You had picket points. The picket points, one of them in fact was a destroyed APC, right, which had a bed, radio, right, and it had a 30 calibre machine gun mounted on a tripod there for doing your night pickets. In support troop, the troop that I was with on my first tour, our vehicles were set back from the wire and others were set forward on the wire. Because in the main, the vehicles in support troop were 3 mortar sections of 2 mortar tracks per section. They're the M125s. They're just like an APC, except they're configured to put a mortar base plate in the back with sideways opening hatches, but they had 50 calibre machine guns, so you put that up on the wire. It's a great equaliser. And right, you would have other vehicles back there, right, the independent sections 8.4 and 8.6, right, they would probably be set back, right, from the wire. So you had a bit of defence in depth. That's how it was done. I was glad to get out of the DAT for the simple reason that my in-country training, which I suppose I undergone, was actually laying concrete footpaths for my first week in country, stripped to the waist in that baking heat. That was my introduction to Vietnam. So I was glad. I was told you're going out to support troop, you'll be driving 8.3 Corporal Dryden, and you're going out with one troop, they'll take you out. It was on Operation Twickenham. I had to go out to Fire Support Base Susan. When we turned north off Route 15, we headed north. There were tanks along with the tracks as well, and several vehicles in front of me. One tank hit a mine. Boom! Welcome to Vietnam. Right, but what I saw there, what fascinated me, was the way the tank crews turned around and they half-tracked the tank to be able to get it to the fire support base to effect a full set of repairs, because the modular suspension of a tank was brilliant. The British were absolute aces at doing that. But to see a tank half-track was a real education. That was my introduction to my first operation. The only Vietnamese that I saw on the base were around at the Pearson Club, right, the Soldiers Club, where you could have a haircut, right, and I think maybe they had Vietnamese cleaners, right, to hit the place, tied it up in the main, and the guy that would come out and take your very deep and meaningful war photograph to send home to mum and dad, right, that was all I saw. Very, very few Vietnamese on the base. You'd probably see Army interpreters. We had a sergeant by the name of Sonny. He was the 3-cav interpreter. Lovely guy. He's now living in Australia, I believe. But other than that, no, you would see the Vietnamese out in the weeds. You would, right? You'd drive through villages, obviously, right, on road runs, convoy escorts. I recall one right in, I think it was June 1969, where an APC, call sign 12, hit a big mine, a very big mine, and the crew were dusted off. And we were tasked to escort the tilt bed out to recover the vehicle. So you could actually see the vehicle, the damage done to it. And then as we were driving back out, I just happened to look down at 2 Vietnamese males, right, standing there watching us, and the hatred in their faces. And I'm only 5 minutes in country. And I thought, we're out here fighting and dying for you, and all you can do is give us the death stare. I couldn't comprehend that at first. It took me a while to get used to it. There were those there that wanted us, and there were those that did not want us. And they hated us, those that didn't want us. Bamboo crates, right, which had an actual pattern of bamboo, right, on their scales. Bootlaces, right, which were a small, very thin viper, would get inside the leaf of your boot, and they were as thick as your GP bootlaces. Right, scorpions, centipedes that long, millipedes bigger, right, real creepy crawlies. Ants, there was a problem, right, with the insects and the ants. If the antennas of a vehicle tripped a hornet's nest, right, well, I've seen soldiers so badly stung, they're puffed up, you can't see their eyes, they had to be dusted off very, very quickly. Yet the funny thing was, if you threw green smoke, it would calm them down. Right, so that was a bit of a worry. Was the fire ants in the trees, and also the hornets, particularly when the engineers were doing land clearing, because they would string a 250-tonne anchor chain between 2 dozers and take out a great swathe of vegetation, and geez, they get cranky, those insects, I'll tell you. So right, you'd close down, they would stop a war. It was the Qantas Freedom Bird, as we called it, which would take us from Vietnam, the funny farm, back to the world. and we flew straight in. I think we may have stopped in Darwin for refuelling. Yes, we did. Right, and then onto Kingsford Smith and out of the aircraft and home. I went straight to bed, but I didn't sleep a wink because I had my brother get my girlfriend and pick me up from the airport, right, take me home. I sneaked in the back door of the house and went to bed. I came home on the wave of the My Lai massacre, which had gone public in September that year, which had happened in March the previous year. So you can imagine the reaction back in Australia from the peaceniks and the anti-war movement. They just went ballistic. It was grist to their mill. So I came home very quietly. Well, I re-engaged for an additional 6 months while I was in National Service when I was called up in July 1967 and subsequently was discharged in January 70, having re-engaged for an extra 6 months. And I went back to my job. The law said you were to be given back your job. And I think within 2 to 3 weeks of that, they showed me the door. Well, there's nothing the Department of Labour and National Service could do about it. As long as your employer took you back, you were on your own. Right, so I had 6 jobs in 6 months. I had a shocker of an Anzac Day. My first one in Anzac Day was April 1970. And I decided there was nothing left for me in Australia. It wasn't Australia to me anymore, so I re-enlisted. And I missed the army anyway. I missed the soldiering, I missed the mateship. You with guys who give you the shirt off their back, literally. And that's a very special type of mateship. And I missed that. And as I said, I enjoyed soldiering. I am from a soldiering family. I was a 3rd generation soldier. And my youngest son is an ex-Royal Australian Navy veteran. So I re-enlisted in June 1970 for 3 years. And I returned to Vietnam in June 1971 for a second tour. I'd have to say that we were blessed with the leaders we had, both commissioned, right, and non-commissioned, the junior NCOs, right, and the senior NCOs. On my second tour, there were a lot of second tour guys back there. It was like being home. That's what it was like for me when I returned to Vietnam. It was like coming home again. I'd found my home. Our squadron sergeant major, my first tour, or the SSM, his name was Roy Hughes. God love him. He was like a dad to us. Strict, bloody strict, but fair, right? But Roy was about our dad's age. On our second tour, we had Warrant Officer Lee Bonza. We loved him to bits just like we did Roy. And our OC from the second tour was Major Terry Walker. He's now deceased. He was known as Dad Walker. We had that type of respect and affection for him. But on the main, we were led by the best of the best. We had very professional NCOs. You couldn't tell an ASHO from a regular soldier because same conditions in terms of employment, same green baggy skin we wore. So, and put it this way, enemy incoming fire didn't discriminate on the class of service. I lost mates over there. I still grieve for them, and I always will. They remain very close to me in my heart and in my thoughts and my prayers. I said a decade of the rosary over there every night I could to get home safely, and it's something that I still continue to do to this day. It's given me mates that I've known for over 2/3 of my life, and I'm now 73 years of age. And I'd give my shirt to them at the drop of a hat, as I know they would for me. It's shown me, and I suppose it's shown the other guys too, that we stood up and were counted at the time. We served in a unit that was the most highly decorated unit in terms of battle honours for the entire conflict, the 3rd Cavalry Regiment. We were awarded every single battle honour. So when the shout went out, we were there. We stood up, and I like to think that it taught me what my strong points were, where my weak points were, and how to build on those and strengthen them. I think it made me the person that I am today. I had two re-enlistments into the army. My second re-enlistment was in 1974, and I retired with the rank of sergeant. I was a cavalry troop sergeant, and I was very proud of that achievement, as I am of my entire service. I was in the best corps, in the best army in the world. I look at my medals like the back of books in a library. They're my CV. They tell a story. The first one is the Medal of the Order of Australia. That's for my advocacy work as a veterans advocate. The other one is the Australian Active Service Medal 1945-75. That was given for Vietnam service, Korea service, Malay and Borneo. There's the Vietnam Campaign Medal. And my two long service medals, which was the Defence Force Service Medal and the National Medal. The Anniversary of National Service Medal. The Australian Defence Medal, the Nasho Medal as we call it, and finally the Vietnamese medal that the Vietnamese government gave us. It's just a CV. That's my CV. Royal Australian Armed Corps, the Black Beret, or the Black Hats as we call ourselves. We're the only unit to go in a battle wearing our ceremonial headgear, because at the time that was also our ceremonial headgear. The badge is the badge of the Royal Australian Armed Corps. It was issued to me at Kapooka in 1967. It is the real deal silver job. It has done 2 tours of duty, and it was actually also the badge of the 3rd Cavalry Regiment. We didn't have a 3 Cav Regiment badge at that time. That didn't come in until we were issued that on the 30th of November 1977 in Townsville, where we took old berets off, new berets on with new badge.